Our fourth reading is from Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 33. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, Jesus came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You have little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And may God speak to us through these verses today. The great American writer Mark Twain once took a tour of the Holy Land with his wife. And one night he decided to take her for a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. He found a man with a boat, and he asked him, "How much would you charge?" Well, the man looked at Twain in his expensive clothes and assumed he was a rich American, so he named a pretty high price for this boat ride on that famous sea. And Twain, when he heard the price, known for his sharp wit, turned away and said, "Now I know why Jesus walked." True story. Matthew, Mark, and John, all three include the story of Jesus walking on the water. Luke leaves it out. Only Matthew adds the part about Peter stepping out of the boat to join Jesus on the sea. And the passage says that Jesus ordered the disciples to cross this sea and wait for him on the other side. He wants to be alone for a while to pray. But hours later, at dawn, the disciples are still out in that boat, and they are now stuck in a storm. And suddenly, they notice a figure coming toward them. We're told they're terrified. They think it's a ghost. But a voice calls out and says, "It is I, Jesus. Don't be afraid." And there he is, walking on those waves toward them. Now, I don't know about you, but even if it did look and sound like Jesus, I'd still be scared. What's he doing out there in the middle of the sea, in the middle of a storm? What if it is an evil spirit that only pretends to be Jesus, trying to trick them? And maybe that's why Peter sort of puts him to the test. "If it is you, Lord, tell me to come out there with you." Jesus says, "Come out here where I am." And Peter does it. Now you might think the other disciples might try to talk him out of it. "Don't be a fool, Peter." Or are they just kind of sitting there quietly, waiting to see what happens? Maybe Peter is as amazed as anyone that he doesn't just sink to the bottom. Instead, he takes a step and then another, and he's actually doing it. But then he notices the fierce wind and the waves, and he gets scared and he starts to sink. Jesus reaches down, pulls him up, helps him back into the boat. "You of little faith, Peter, why did you doubt?" Now, as with any miracle story, we each have to kind of decide for ourselves what kind of miracle it was. And the same is true here. Is the real point of the story that Jesus could walk on water, or is there another point, another meaning? Matthew could have just ended his story with Jesus coming to the disciples on the sea, like Mark and John do, but he adds this incident with Peter. Now, Jesus once promised his followers that with faith, they could perform miracles too. I suppose that includes us. Does it? Can we do miracles? Now, I'm pretty sure that if I had a boat out in the middle of the Ohio River and I climbed out and tried to stroll to shore, it's not going to work. I also think it is a big theological mistake if we read a story like this one and assume that it means that Jesus will reach down and miraculously save us from every danger. We know better than that. I think that whenever we are confronted by a miracle story, our question should not really be, did this really happen? But what is it trying to tell us? So, what might this story be trying to tell us? Now, one commentator suggests that it helps if we know what ancient people thought about the sea. Back then, the sea was not just this big body of water with fish in it. They also believed that there were monsters and demons down in the cold, dark depths. They believed that these monsters and demons were the ones who stirred up the storms. So it's no wonder that the disciples were frightened when they see this ghost or whatever it is walking on the water. They figure the sea is the home of evil spirits. Maybe that's an evil spirit. Now, numerous times through Scripture, the sea is often portrayed as the home of chaos and evil. It is beyond human control. It's a source of fear. And so the importance of this story, as one commentator suggests, is not that Jesus was walking on water, but that he was walking on the sea. That he was walking unafraid on something they were all afraid of. There's an episode of the old Bob Newhart show. Anybody remember Bob Newhart, where he played the psychologist? He's trying to help a patient who's so afraid of everything that he can't lead a normal life. And Bob reminds the patient of what Franklin Roosevelt once said, that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And his patient says, well, that's my biggest fear. Fear. Now, fear is part of being human. We fear things. We fear illness. We fear death. We fear losing our jobs. We fear that our relationships will fail. We fear that terrible events will overwhelm us. We fear being hurt or ridiculed. We fear stepping out into the unknown or going beyond the traditional. So, we tend to devote a lot of time and effort to worry, to trying to make ourselves feel safe, to keeping things the way they are. But what happens sometimes is that we can become prisoners of our fear. And the truth is that no matter how secure we try to be, something always eventually gets through to us. So, if only we could overcome our fears, we would be better equipped to handle these things when they do happen. If we no longer fear the worst, if we no longer fear even death, then the worst no longer has any hold on us. We are free of it. And in that freedom, we can truly live. And isn't that really what Jesus offers us? Free, abundant life. Now, fear can be what prevents us from being bold in our faith, too. Fear that we will be ridiculed or ostracized, and in some parts of the world, even condemned or punished. When Matthew wrote his gospel, Christians were being persecuted and killed. Some have said that was the stormy sea they were trying to row on, their persecution. Now, one of our biggest fears may be never knowing what Jesus might ask of us. We might be afraid he will call us out there, where it's a bit rough. He might ask us to come walk where we usually don't walk. So, as some have suggested, commentators, writers often say things like, well, we like to keep Jesus out there on the fringe of our lives. You know, we like to come worship him on Sunday morning, but we kind of want to keep him out there where he can just kind of stay this ghost some faint image or idea that has no real substance, no real call on our lives, don't let him get too close. And out there on that stormy sea, Peter and the disciples saw Jesus walking calmly and easily across the source of their fears. And maybe it was in that moment that Peter sort of realized something. Maybe he realized that sometimes we have to face our fears. We have to trust that we are not facing them alone. After all, that is Jesus calling him out there, right? Now, some have said that Peter is usually the one who says and does things in the Gospels that the others are afraid to do. That because Peter seems to know what we sometimes forget. That when it comes to something like faith, there are times when we must take chances. When we need to come off the sidelines and into the game. Time to take risks, even if we fall on our faces now and then. Because if faith is worth anything at all, it's worth everything. Peter understands that following Jesus is not a spectator sport. It is not about playing it safe. Jesus didn't play it safe. He risked his own life, and he lost it. Some people never get out of the boat, even if the boat is leaking and they're up to their knees in water. But Peter knows that there are times when we have to leave the security of our little boats and we have to step out in faith into the unknown, trusting that Jesus is there. Faith becomes the answer to fear. Now, it is not always so easy to let our faith conquer our fear. Fear is hardwired into us. It's genetic. It is a natural instinct for self-preservation. Faith is something we have to learn and something we have to develop. It's like a muscle that you need to exercise and build up. You of little faith, Jesus says to Peter, why did you doubt? I don't think Jesus was angry at Peter. I think it was more like, you were doing it, Peter. It was happening. Why did you give in to your fear and let it pull you under? Now notice too, Jesus does not kick Peter out of the club for showing some fear. Frankly, Jesus often chided all of his followers for the weakness of their faith, but he never abandoned them. I sometimes think that Jesus may not have a quota system for faith. Even just a little bit seems to make him happy. Now again, it's been said that when it comes to Peter, there's a reason why he gets, if you notice, more gospel time than really any other disciple. And some have suggested that it is because he is the symbol of the church. In the Gospels, he is the spokesperson for our common humanity. Because like Peter, our walk toward Jesus is shaky and unsteady. Like Peter, we all get some things right, and we get some things wrong. Like Peter, we obey Jesus, and we deny him. Like Peter, we are a mixture of courage and cowardice, of wisdom and foolishness, of belief and doubt. And I think maybe we can sum it up this way, and it's really kind of the summary, I think, of this story from our scriptures. There is always a little fear in our faith, but there is also always a little faith in our fear. Amen.